This is Telling the Story, a podcast dedicated to exploring faith, spirituality, arts, and culture, hosted by Ninth Hour Theatre Company in Ottawa, Canada. Thank you for joining us for our podcast series discussing the themes and ideas expressed in the beloved story of Babette's Feast by Danish author Karen Blixen. Throughout the series, we'll talk with artists and special topical guests discussing things such as refuge and sanctuary, the art of hospitality, the importance of cultural exchange, beauty and pleasure, and the power of living in community. What makes our podcast unique is that you'll also get an insider's look at the many artistic and production decisions that are made in putting together a theatrical production as we rehearse a new play adaptation of Babette's Feast. So sit back and settle in for a stimulating dive into deep ideas and the world of theater magic. Well, I'm back for another exciting discussion on the Telling the Story podcast. I'm joined by two wonderful guests today, and we're going to talk about beauty and pleasure and how it relates to the story of Babette's Feast and just in general in life. So I'm joined today by ADAM BARROWS, returning guest. ADAM is one of the performing artists in the production of Babette's Feast. ADAM is proud to be performing in his first show for Ninth Hour. He could be seen on the Gladstone stage last season as Michael Sean Hastings in Late Company with Elevator Theatre Company, and as Richard in The Lion in Winter with Phoenix Players. He also played Zach in Lost Baggage Musical Theater's recent production of A Chorus Line. He has been a professor of English literature at Carleton University since 2009. Welcome, Professor.
Oh, thanks. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me back.
My pleasure. I can't wait to talk about this subject matter with you. And I'm also joined by a new guest to the Telling the Story podcast, MARITA SMITH. MARITA is a registered nurse and sexual health educator. She has worked for over a decade in pediatric emergency care, specializing as a forensic nurse examiner, caring for children and youth affected by sexualized violence, including sexual abuse, assault, and sex trafficking. Her education work centers around the importance of collaborative, trauma-informed, community-centered sex education as an upstream approach to violence prevention. Through her personal and professional journey, she's become committed to the importance of centering. MARITA is also someone that I have regular good conversations with about all sorts of topics and ideas, which is why I invited her on this podcast, because I think she'd have lots to say about these topics. So welcome, MARITA.
Thank you so much. And right at the end there, in the little last line, centering.
Yeah, did it cut off?
I think it must have cut off.
Oh, darn.
But it was really centering the importance of pleasure in the conversations about sex education. So I'm really excited that we're here to talk about this.
I wondered if centering was just a term I wasn't familiar with.
I know, me too. Even as I was reading it, I was like...
Yeah. We're just doing a teaser so that, it's going to come out in the conversation.
Centering what?
Yeah,
Centering
well,
what?
thanks for clarifying that. That's unfortunate. But yeah, okay, great. So say it again. What was it? What was centering?
I don't remember exactly how I'd written it, but centering the power of pleasure as part of the conversation within sex education.
Okay.
And that's a lot of what we talk about when we talk about sex education, or when we think about healthcare and talking about sex with particularly with young people. We think about preventing pregnancy, preventing STIs, preventing things that we don't want to happen.
Right.
Rather than talking about sex in a way that presents it as this really important, beautiful aspect of human experience and connection, as we'll talk about today.
Mm-hmm.
And instead, we just think about the negative aspects. And so I'm really excited for this conversation today to think about how we can shift how we think about whether it's sex, whether it's food, whether it's how we relate to each other, that we are including the power of pleasure and the bridges that connect us in those positive ways.
And it's so good that you brought that up, because we talk about that when it comes to the story of Babette's Feast, that this community, this cloistered religious community, sort of withdraws from experiencing pleasure in life. And there's this sort of a feeling like many sort of perhaps some very ultra maybe conservative religious communities, that to experience pleasure, or that the body itself perhaps is negative or should be avoided.
Or
that's
dangerous.
That, beauty is dangerous, because it might lead you astray. It might lead you away from God. So the idea, again, even having a conversation where we're going to talk about faith, spirituality, and sex and pleasure and beauty all-in-one conversation is really unique, and it's not like it's often spoken about all-in-one like that. That the body matters just as much as the spirit. So yeah, I'm excited to dig into this, and maybe before we go too much further, just maybe ask you guys sort of like a start-off question, like how would you like define? I suppose let's start with pleasure. How would you define pleasure if you could?
Yeah, well, I think generally we tend to think of pleasure as something that makes us happy, that makes us feel good. And it's funny because we're doing this play essentially about a really puritanical group of people in the 19th century living in northern Norway. And I came across a quote the other day by the American humorist H.L. Mencken, who defined Puritanism as the haunting fear that someone somewhere is happy, right? And we think of that a lot, that like, people shouldn't be out there having pleasure and fun because, there is this idea that, I can't speak to any religion other than Christianity. I consider myself a Christian. There's the idea that, Jesus suffered. And so suffering is your route to sanctity and to holiness. And so if I'm not feeling suffering, I must not be spiritual. And so if I'm feeling all this pleasure, if I'm eating something or doing something that makes me feel good, well, I'm not being very Jesus-like, am I?
And that it's of the devil, actually.
Yeah.
The pleasure is.
So, and the community, the play thinks that religious community play thinks that for sure, right? Until the feast opens their eyes.
Yeah. Although it's interesting. I mean, an easy equation between pleasure and happiness, I suppose, could really be complicated. I'm sure you have things to say about that because, if I please myself by eating 2 boxes of donuts, and not a lot of happiness leads to that at the end of it. You know what I mean? So it is interesting to think about.
Oh, that's interesting.
Is happiness and pleasure? Is that why we are interested in pleasure?
Interesting. Right. Yeah. What do you think, Marita? Pleasure, if you had to define it, like, what are your initial thoughts on that? Yeah.
Well, I think I think you set me up perfectly for how I think about it, because I think a lot of times when we think of, or the way that our culture talks about pleasure is very much what you're saying, is just that happiness, the enjoyment of the moment. And we can often participate in that as an escape from the world, right? You think about, for myself, coming home from a shift where I don't really want to think, I'm exhausted. I don't really want to deal with the world and with my life and with myself. And so I might turn on the TV and get a bag of chips, and I'm getting pleasure from eating those chips and watching a show. But there's an emptiness to it. It doesn't feed my soul. I don't feel good the next day. My body doesn't feel good. And so as I was thinking about this question of how I think about what pleasure is, I think of it as an experience of embodied presence where there's an integration of the spiritual and the physical. And it's something that is going to feed my soul as well as my body.
Would you say it has to be, there's a mindfulness in its pursuit rather than a mindlessness? Like, not that we've all done it, of course, a bag of chips late at night, whatever, like, but really it's just sort of you're not overthinking it in any way. Yeah. It's not an engaging thing, And I think if we're thinking about how that connects to, we're thinking about it as food. We think about the difference between, I have friends that have a farm and they raise animals for meat, and they have a garden. And so the pleasure that we get out of being together in a community, working together to make the food, to harvest the food, the tactile sensation of digging in a garden and pulling up the potatoes and then cooking them in the oven and flavoring them and talking together about the recipe and making the food and eating it. That experience is so full of life and generative force and community, versus that eating the bag of chips alone on the couch. And you can apply that to sex, right? Like the ways that you can participate in pleasure as a way to escape. You could talk about hookup culture, where people are often intoxicated and not really present to themselves, and not participating in a sort of generative experience with another person where you're looking to connect. It's more a way of escape. And so I think that there's so many ways to think about it. But I think that having this bigger conversation about what is the life-giving force behind pleasure,
I think there's something really important. And certainly for me in my journey has been that process of integrating the spiritual and the physical.
Wow. I love how you cut that apart, both of you, even like the happiness related to pleasure. Yeah, because like you can think of pleasure as a mere pursuit, hedonistic pursuit, like where it's just like anything that feels good, that feels good, I should like, yay, bring it on. It's pleasurable. But I like what you're saying, Marita, that there's something more to it. Like that, I think we could all agree if that's how you live your life. And certainly the Bible talks about was it Solomon that kind of just did whatever he wanted, and at the end of the day, it was like all his vanity. And so he pursued, like, was it Solomon? Yeah, I think so. Like King Solomon or whatever. And he pursued like pleasure, hedonistic maybe. And it's sort of like, but even he's writing, and that it's all vanity, and there's something interesting about if you only pursued hedonistic pleasure, where does that bring you, right? And that's not what you were saying at all, Marita.
No,
yeah.
and what that's a good example because how many concubines did he have, right? Yeah. He was using other people's life force for his own pleasure.
Oh, well said.
And of course, at the end, it's worth nothing because it's consumed, and that desire to consume, that's, I work with people impacted by sexual violence. That's what's happening. Somebody is consuming somebody else's life force, their sexuality, their beauty, everything that makes them human. And it's being used rather than entering into that generative exchange with someone else where you're actually creating something new.
So in a way, you're talking about like a kind of economy of pleasure, like that we're involved in a kind of economics of pleasure. So, would you say that you should be aware of your role within that particular kind of economy?
Yeah. I think that being awake to that and conscious of that. And, in capitalism, there's always pleasure that's being sold to you, right? Like go to Vegas, right? You'll experience that sort of overwhelming, consumeristic, materialistic, whether it's humans or objects or whatever it is. There's no there's nothing being generated there. It's only consumption.
Oh, I love this distinction. And like one could argue, like consumptive. Yeah. Is that a word? Consumptive? Consumption, consumption, pleasure based on just pure consumption, just pure, sort of like, hedonistic pleasure in the moment kind of thing. Not being generative is super interesting concept versus pleasure like the feast that Babette prepares. Yeah. It's pleasurable. They don't even know why. They've never had this food before in their entire life. She's a famous chef from Paris. And it doesn't remain in the realm of pleasure. Beauty seems to be generated from the feast. And it's not about food.
The concrete economics of that is she spends all of her lottery winnings to buy the ingredients to prepare the food for these people. So that's it's like a gift economy, I suppose. And then the question in the play, I guess, is what does she get from that? She says at the end, she gets the feeling of having been an artist, the pride of having been an artist. So it's interesting. And she likes making people happy. There's that line where she's like, I made them happy. I could make them happy, and it's like, and I find like with that part of the play and coming back to what you were saying too, Marita, like I find it was like in that case, the food is pleasurable, but really the feast is more than food. There's something that became generated in the room that perhaps is beauty, capital B. I don't know.
Well, there's a line that she says in the movie, and I don't know the difference between the play script and the movie, but from the movie, there's a line where she says, an artist is never poor.
Yes.
At the end.
Love that
and
line.
So the transaction that she makes is in this world where, you have to exchange money for things. That's the world we live in. It's the reality of it. But she understood that there was something bigger happening and that the money was actually immaterial in comparison to what she was experiencing in that community.
Yeah, that is one of my favorite lines in the play. I have to say I'm an artist and an artist is never poor. It's so, I eat that line up because I just feel that to be true, at least for myself.
I guess you could say like not everything can be commodified, in terms of turned into something that can be equalized through the exchange of money. So it's not about the 10,000 francs or whatever it is. It's about It's about what can't really be commodified in that transaction. It's a difficult thing to think about, though, in the world we live in. Anything being non-commodifiable, right?
Right. Non-transactional.
Right.
You know.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, maybe that brings us nicely into like, maybe let's define beauty if we can. It is hard. I mean, I've definitely studied the transcendent beauty for years now. I like to talk about it. If people know me, they know I do. But I'll just lay it out that I believe when we use the word beauty, at least in the English language, we often are referring, I think most people are referring to what I would call aesthetic beauty or artistic beauty, which is, in my opinion, subjective. And even I've actually even heard scholarly and people and theologians who are attempting to talk about transcendent beauty, transcendental beauty, like the three being beauty, goodness, and truth. And even they sometimes go back into aesthetic beauty. So I'll give you an example of what I mean, because it's important to parse it out. And I've had multiple conversations with people about beauty, capital B. And being an artist, it's tough because they assume you mean beauty in a sort of aesthetic, artistic sense. But I don't mean that. And so so in other words, for me to say capital B beauty, transcendental beauty is Mozart's music. Well, that's not objective in the sense that not everyone prefers or likes that music. For some people, it doesn't move them at all. So then it can't be transcendent beauty or objective beauty, because it isn't sacred universally. It isn't shared universally, that sort of thing. And then here's another example of beauty. You could experience beauty watching a sunset. It would be hard to find someone who doesn't like a sunset, who thinks it's not beautiful. Like it'd be tough to find someone that doesn't think the sunset's beautiful. However, the sunset in itself is aesthetically pleasing and beautiful. But I will argue that in that moment of aesthetic beauty, like the different kind of capital B beauty can take place. So the sunset can certainly be so beautiful aesthetically that it moves you into this higher reality of transcendent beauty, that you feel like you're part of something greater than yourself. You have a moment. Maybe it's just this this life transforming moment, a transcending moment in your life. You know, like a moment where your eyes open, or you suddenly believe in God or whatever, or you suddenly reverse course in the path you're taking. So your life is altered. There's an altered nature to that kind of encounter with capital B beauty. But and it's certainly hard to define. It's very hard to define, but there's something worth chatting about in that, and of course what happens in the play and the story of Babette's Feast as well. But what are your initial thoughts on beauty and sort of everything I kind of said? Like, do you agree? Do you disagree? Like, it's sort of hard to talk about sometimes because it's, we only have the one word, beauty, so yeah.
Well, you could throw another word into it. So the 18th century thinker Edmund Burke has a really important essay for English Romanticism called On the Sublime and the Beautiful. And he distinguishes the sublime and sublimity from beauty, because to him, the sublime is actually a more powerful. It plays upon the feelings more powerfully and profoundly, and it can be provoked by things that you might not characterize as beautiful, like looking at a raging storm. Is that beautiful? Maybe not, but it's certainly sublime, and it's that thing. It makes you feel small, makes you feel a part of something much bigger and more cosmic. Looking up at a tall mountain peak, and so and even death, the perception of they're watching, a painting of somebody dying. Right? That'd be weird to call that beautiful, but it can provoke feelings of sublimity and remind us of our own mortality. So that's a really important piece.
Like
Burke's
awe, wonder, mystery,
all of those things. And beauty can do that. I mean, but I also think of the famous Keats poem, Ode on a Grecian Urn, which ends, beauty is truth, beauty, that is all you need to know, all you have ever known, all you need to know. But most scholars read that ironically, that he's being ironic, that in fact, there's a whole lot more you need to know. than just what is beauty is true and what is truth is beautiful.
Oh, so they think he's being ironic, but you're saying he meant it.
I think it is. I think it is ironic because he talks about beauty teasing us out of eternity, and as it being a kind of tease. So different people read that poem differently. But I do think introducing this idea, I think it's what you're getting at when you say capital B beauty. To me, I'm hearing more of the kind of Burkean sublime.
I love that.
Not to get too academic.
No, please.
Yeah, that's
and the word like the sublime. Who even talks that way anymore? Like who uses the word sublime? Like, oh, how was it last night? It was sublime. How was the sex? It was sublime. Or whatever, right? Like how was the meal? Like it was, it's interesting, sublime. But you made me think too about this beautiful line in the play where righteousness and bliss kiss. I keep coming back to that word bliss too. Who talks about bliss?
Bliss.
But this idea of righteousness and bliss coming together screams of capital B beauty on some level to me. I don't know why those two words married together. Like bliss on its own could be sort of an empty, shallow happiness, but bliss and righteousness seems like it's more profound and deeper. I don't know. I'm not sure. What are your initial thoughts, Marita, on beauty, capital B or otherwise?
I mean, I love all of that. I think it really feeds into what I came up with, which is that it's really difficult to define, A, and B, I think it's something that maybe can be less described as experienced.
Oh, I think that's so true.
Because everything that the two of you are talking about, like you're actually talking about experiences. Yeah. You're talking about the experience of all these different experiences that we go through as humans. And what I was thinking about when you were talking is the idea of childbirth and how it's such a deeply painful and sometimes very scary and sometimes very violent and sometimes very difficult experience. And yet it's maybe one of the most beautiful things that we can experience as humans, to witness a new life coming into
universally sacred. Like it's rare to meet someone who didn't like their life was changed when their child was born. It's like universally sacred, it seems.
But there's not a lot of aesthetic beauty necessarily.
No, it can be quite ugly. Quite ugly.
Messy, screaming. No, that's a great example, Marita, on the like beauty doesn't mean like sort of like easy or just like like pleasing, so to speak. It's certainly not aesthetically. And then what do you think, just when you're talking to like, what do you think about beauty being I love, what you're thinking about beauty being best experienced. It's almost hard to describe or talk about something else. And we, in the play, they eat the food, but they experience something. It's not even about the food by the end of the play. And certainly your character, Adam, has this brilliant speech. It's almost like in another realm while the people are still like eating and enjoying themselves. Your character goes off in this big speech and it's an experience. It seems he's like describing something in the room.
Yeah. And the feeling, I mean, he reassesses his life and the choices he's made and whether it really is, whether you need to regret things or whether, the experience of life is just a boundless gift. Yeah. So the food, eating turtle soup and, quail wouldn't normally move us to have these kinds of profound reflections on the nature of existence. So it is a magical thing that happens in the play.
Do you think it's magical too because this community has lived denying themselves pleasure for forever, for so long that they don't even know, like it's just so altering and they don't even know what's going on. Like so there's a mystery to it or something.
Yeah. But and the question is, to what extent were these people not enjoying their lives? I've been thinking that as well. Like, I mean, they seem to be enjoying the life that they live. And yet this experience that they've never had before just pushes them into a completely different realm. And it might be that realm that you were talking about, about pleasure, about like sort of like unthinking, unreflective pleasure versus pleasure that you understand its relationship to spirit and soul and something larger. So it might be that they've got a very, very simple and, something they've relied on, a sense of faith. This is how you experience and express faith. This is how one lives in the world in a holy way. And they've just been doing it sort of unthinkingly for a very long time. And it's, unthinking, the life unexamined, that's what Socrates warned us about, right? So I suppose any kind of life that that becomes habituated and you stop remembering or understanding or being curious about how it relates to other things. It goes back again to that Mencken quote, and about, I'm worried that someone else out there might be living life differently from me. Yeah. I mean, we're all familiar with in the political sphere with people who seem to be driven to rage by the idea that there are people out there living with different values or different practices. It's a very strange thought. No way.
It is that you're occupied with that, right? That you're occupied of how other people, are living their lives.
What does it have to do with you?
I know. And I think that's an interesting question to think about why that is. Like if I have made a choice that I believe is a good choice for me, I've chosen to abstain from a particular thing for a particular reason because I think it's a good choice. Why would it bother me if somebody else is enjoying that thing? Right. Like there's no harm to me in that. But and I've thought a lot about this question from the perspective of sexuality and the choices that people make around sexuality. And I think that when we make a choice that often comes from other people, a belief that somebody else has prescribed what we should or shouldn't do, if we have to make a big sacrifice for that choice that wasn't actually our choice from our own sense of this is what I desire to do. Like some people desire to be a vegan for various reasons and that brings them that is the best decision for them and they enjoy the food and that's a choice that they make. They don't have to worry about everybody else that is doing something else. But if you've made a sacrifice because you believe it's the right thing and somebody's told you to do it, and then you walk around and everybody else is enjoying that thing, that's deeply painful. And there's a deep shame because you actually do want that thing. You actually desire to be enjoying that thing and everybody else is enjoying it and you're not.
Yeah.
It's a very different thing because the desire is not yours.
That's right.
It's someone else's. And also often you might think you deserve something because you've made a great sacrifice. Back to the transaction thing. Like, I've made a great sacrifice for this. Therefore I should be honored for it, not made fun of for my choices or whatever might be the case.
Well, you reminded me when you were talking about, well, I mean, I couldn't help but think about how, certainly in a lot of religious communities or faith communities, that what seems super valued is like meeting your partner, getting to live with your partner, getting to have sex with your partner, all that. And it's like, it's hyper valued. It's elevated to like the most pinnacle, pleasurable, wondrous thing you could possibly achieve in life.
And it's the reward for holding back.
Yeah. And yet in the same breath, like that, religious communities would deny that to other people, like queer people, or gay people and stuff. Not all religious communities, of course, but some. But I always find that weird to watch in the sense that this is this awesome thing. Everyone needs to do it, but not you. You don't get to, even though you long for it and you want it to. And you watch everyone through the window pane enjoying themselves inside with the warmth and the good food and the love.
Although are they, as someone who's on marriage number 2, are they enjoying themselves that much? I mean, I can also say, there are that valorization, that lionization of the kind of heteronormative family with 2.5 kids or whatever.
2.5.
If you're in it and it's not pleasurable and healthful but you somehow feel guilty that it should be. And like I've achieved what I've been told I'm supposed to want.
I bet you that's a struggle for a lot of people.
There are a lot of people.
Especially in like, and probably not just religious communities or faith communities. I'm sure in general, the message is that, you should be happy.
You should be happy.
What's wrong? Why aren't you?
But it goes back to what you were saying, Rita, about, is this your desire? Is this something you've been told? It should be your desire.
And when you've made those sacrifices and you're someone who's followed the little pathway that you're supposed to follow at great cost, and then you're told, and I think really prosperity gospel is the word that comes to mind. You're told that it's going to deliver this beautiful thing and it's going to be transcendent and it's going to be all these wonderful things. Meanwhile, nobody's ever told you anything about anatomy and how sex works and how pleasure works and how to bring someone else pleasure. When it doesn't deliver that, like, what do you do with that? It's really difficult to look at yourself and say, hey, maybe what I've done and all the sacrifices that I've made and all the things that I did, it didn't deliver, the transaction isn't complete. And I would hope for some people that leads to, a process of transformation and asking questions and growth. But I think for a lot of people, it is very difficult to see other people enjoying that, especially people who you think maybe haven't made the sacrifices. And so then that doubling down of control happens. Yeah. And I think it's really beautiful that doesn't happen in this play. It's the opposite, actually.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, they're very, they're opened up to new possibilities, new wondrous aspects of life. And
but they had to come to the table.
They had to come to the table, quite literally and metaphorically as well.
Yeah, exactly.
No, that's interesting. And like, it is. Like I remember being in certain communities and you're sort of warned and lectured about staying away. And like, I mean, there's degrees of this, right? I mean, if everyone's seen the movie Footloose, of course, like it's a religious community in which dancing is forbidden. Dancing is dangerous. Example. Dancing
leads to sex.
It's going to lead to sex, all these things. And yeah, it can, but yeah, like that's a great movie that's a great movie actually. And they use the Bible to sort of like say, you can't dance. And then of course, the one kid who's not even religious, the Kevin Bacon character, of course, uses the Bible again. I believe there's this beautiful courtroom scene. They're in court or whatever. And I think he's like David danced, like King David danced naked in the streets, actually, I believe. I think that's reference to the Bible. So it's like dancing is in the Bible. It's part of the Bible. And it doesn't seem ambiguous. There are more ambiguous things in the Bible, whether God condemns it or not, I suppose. And lots of people make those arguments. Of course, but it doesn't seem dancing is condemned in any way, but I could be wrong. I'd love someone to point out where that might be, but yeah, like dancing is pretty cool. I remember when I first danced for joy after a very transcendent experience of mine when I was in university. I just remember like I don't know, like full body joy. I couldn't help but dance. Like it was very spontaneous dancing out of sheer joy and an encounter with capital B beauty. And I just, I don't know, like there's something about it that's really fantastic. If you can get over the human shyness of like, oh, I don't want to.
The
vulnerable, right?
I don't know that I've ever spontaneously danced for joy.
No,
it sounds great.
It's so good.
I don't know that I have.
Yeah, it was really great. Yeah, I have to say, and even like dancing, like just kind of like cathartically, like you can just feel some release in your body. Like, I remember, So anyhow, that's my experience with dance for sure.
Yeah, it's hugely powerful. And I think if you look at the things that are forbidden in high control, whether it's high control religion or authoritarian regimes,
good point.
It's the experiences of that capital B beauty and pleasure that connect us with our humanity, with others, with the world around us. And it actually makes us much more difficult to control because we can be rooted in who am I? What do I want? Where is my soul? What does my soul need? What does my community need?
Well said.
And it makes us much more difficult to control. Indigenous communities have always used dance actually as part of a way to bring the community together in healing, to solve conflict, to create change, because it is such a powerful force. It's a hugely powerful force, which is exactly why it would need to be controlled by people who seek to control.
Oh, that's such a good point. Like that and so many other things, right? Like just going to the movies or, I mean, there's communities that deny pleasure of all sorts because it will lead you astray. I like that point, Marita, that it would lead to control. Ninth Hour's original work, Beauty Will Save the World. The force in it is called control. The force that people follow or don't follow. And in the play, the control is nothing. It's them. So it's a manifestation of everyone's souls, a collection of fears and anxieties from over the years. It's their own control, and there's other people controlling each other, sure, but there's a letting yourself be controlled because beauty, right? The encounter of beauty and knowing who you are and what you want, as you were laying out, Marita, it's just, it's connecting
it dispels
the dots.
Fear, right? Like you can't be in fear when you are truly in connection with that, with your own life force and the life force of others in that positive generative way. It's not compatible. It's because it connects us to love, I think.
It connects us to love.
And fear is not compatible with that kind of love.
No, it connects us to love. Pleasure connects us to beauty, connects us to love. Mm-hmm. So is beauty like generated out of pleasure? Transcendent beauty, capital B beauty. Like, can one experience capital B beauty without pleasure? Like, did the two go hand in hand? And we're talking about capital P pleasure, I think, in a sense, aren't we? We're not talking about the bag of chips with the violent show. We're talking about something more than
I also
that,
think, some pleasures don't come easily to us. I mean, as someone who teaches difficult literature, I'm a fan of James Joyce, Ulysses and I've written on Finnegan's Wake.
Oh, wow.
These are not books that you're smiling while you're reading them. You might be actually really frustrated and irritated that you don't understand, their meaning doesn't unlock itself easily, or going to hear a very complex piece of orchestral 20th century.
It could be torture music. For some people.
It could be torture. and I think isn't there an expression, one man's pleasure is another man's pain,
so.
Right?
I think so.
But what I try to get my students to realize is like, okay, look, the TikTok video is, not to be snobby, the TikTok video is a fun little thing, might actually be a really clever piece of art, but I'm going to explain to you why this 700-page novel,
good luck,
that's where its vocabulary is already, words that you wouldn't normally use, can also, if you give it time and devotion and attention, can yield perhaps a more complex and lasting form of pleasure. That's a very difficult argument for us,
time and devotion. It maybe there's like a cost on your part, a sacrifice on your part to experience this great pleasure.
It's certainly, to me, the works of art that have demanded from me, I feel more of a reward than, say, something that I just immediately read it and it made me laugh or it made me cry, and that the feeling seemed very transitory and not very lasting. I mean, this is difficult, right? The idea that pleasure with a capital P, to use your term, could be something that's difficult, and complex, and making demands upon you that don't feel necessarily good.
And it must be the case, because if beauty was so easy to pursue, we'd all be doing it both individually and collectively. Yeah. But it's so much easier to pursue ugliness or distraction. Like, I think you can easily
the quick version.
The quick version. Yeah. Like Brave New World by Aldous Huxley. I mean, people are controlled, to use your word, Maria, through pleasure, which is super interesting, right?
That's right.
So,
I just taught that.
That's right. Isn't that interesting? Yeah. It's like they're controlled through pleasure.
That's right. And pleasure is a distraction. In that case, they have the children do erotic play with each other.
Yes.
And it keeps them subservient to the state.
Right.
Because they realize that actually sexual repression is much more dangerous to the state than actual sexual permissiveness. And we live in a society that's extraordinarily sexually permissive. I'm saying we living in North America.
For sure.
And so it seems very strange in some ways to look at popular culture and say, oh, there's a problem with people experiencing pleasure, because it seems like nothing but pleasure. Right. You almost want people to learn a little asceticism, a little puritanism in their taste.
Right.
It's like a pendulum swing.
We have the opposite problem in a sense, like the bliss with no righteousness or whatever.
But I wanted to ask Marita too, like in the work that you do, it's a cliche sort of, that this new generation, Generation Z, the 16 to 24-year-olds now aren't having as much sex as they used to, all that kind of stuff, or aren't driving. I remember the great pleasure to me before sex was getting that driver's license. Right. Oh my God, the feeling of, being able to roll the window down, the wind in my hair, and the freedom to go anywhere. And so it strikes me, it's strange, this generation. I have a son who's that generation, and I don't understand it really. So is it a cliche? Is it true statistically? And B, how do we deal with that? Like, what's the explanation for that?
Well, let me just tell you all the answers, right? No pressure. Well, I love that you asked that question, because yes, it is true. I don't have the data in front of me, but it is true that younger people are not having sex at the same rates. And I think there's lots of different reasons. I suspect that social media and smartphones have something to do with it, based on how we spend our time and how we get our dopamine and how we connect with other people online rather than in real life. But what I was thinking as you were talking is that, yes, there's a lot of permissiveness in terms of like how we talk about pleasure, I'm not even sure that I would use the word permissiveness. I think that there's an enormous amount of sexualization in the world, but I'm not sure that we actually are talking about, we're not certainly not having this conversation about pleasure. And so, yes, in the broader culture, it's more acceptable for younger people to engage in sex in a way that it wasn't necessarily in my community, for sure. But it's not the actual teaching of the language is not happening. And that's what I was thinking as you were talking about, and Charlie, as you asked that question. In order to appreciate beauty, we actually have to learn the language of pleasure. If I look at a painting that is, let's say it's a kind of particular style that I don't really understand, I might not see that as beautiful. But if I go to art classes and I learn about how paints and how color theory and how it's done, and I spend time with it, and I sit in a field and I think about the colors that I see in the clouds. That's something I did with my nieces and nephews recently, because I love doing this with kids, because learning the language of pleasure, I think, is a beautiful thing to do. Wow, kids know it naturally. So they don't need to be taught.
Right.
And so we sat on in the Gatineau Park. We had climbed up and done a hike. And I said, what color do you see in the clouds? And they had no problem. They started off with white, and then they had no problem. They just kept going. And we saw all kinds of color in the clouds. But if we don't talk about the language of pleasure, and exactly as you were saying, that 700-page book, that's not something that you can just pick up and be like, oh, this is a beautiful story. You won't. It doesn't make any sense. You have to put the time and the intention into learning it. And I love that you brought up the car metaphor, because I think it is actually the perfect metaphor for talking to kids about sex. Because what we do with kids, so using the car metaphor, we say, don't have sex until, in my community, it was till you're married. For some people, it's till you're 18, till you're 20, whatever the arbitrary decision is. And we say, don't have sex, don't think about it. And maybe some people will say, don't get STIs, and here's some condoms, and so on. And what we're doing is handing them a pair of car keys when they turn a certain age, and saying, okay, go have fun, figure it out. Right. We would never do that.
Right.
We would never do that. We teach them about car safety. We teach them about how cars work. We teach them how to be safe. And we expose them to the joys of it and the positive aspects, and talk about what they can do with it. And I think we need to change how we think about and talk about sex in that way.
Right, because we either avoid it altogether or just let loose with no. I like this idea of the language of pleasure, and I'm sort of like, I think you guys are both onto it. I think you're jiving too with the theory I had years ago, thinking about capital B beauty a fair bit, and its opposite being ugliness, I guess you could say, capital U, like the ugly things in life that keep us down, keep us suppressed, keep us controlled, keep us distracted, keep us entertained. I think it's true that this idea of this type of pleasure that leads to capital B beauty, there's a cost. It's not easy. If it was, we would just all be pursuing it constantly. But I think we're pursuing cheap, trinkety versions, gimmicky little ad like marketing versions of it. But I think it does require effort, time. Like you can't appreciate, a Dostoevsky novel without truly reading it and understanding. You can't. And again, I'm not saying a Dostoevsky novel is capital B beauty. I'm saying the experience of what you get out of it might be though. I'm not saying, the Mozart or that painting. I'm not saying those are objective forms of beauty. Those are just aesthetic versions of lowercase beauty, and they're subjective. But I think you're onto something that, at least I think so, like pursuing anything that's beautiful, capital B, again, having a childbirth. It's not just like, easy. It's not, there's such a lengthy lead up to it and a follow through way after the baby is born, and like anything, it just takes extraordinary effort. And there's a cost. There is a cost, whether it be time or effort. There just seems to be, if you want that real thing. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think, this may be taking things a slightly different direction, but I feel like if we're going to talk about beauty, we have to talk about social aesthetic standards of beauty.
You are listening to Telling the Story, a podcast dedicated to exploring faith, spirituality, arts, and culture, hosted by Ninth Hour Theatre Company in Ottawa, Canada. We'll return in a moment with the rest of our discussion.
Ninth Hour Theatre Company presents Beauty Will Save the World, a brand new musical audio drama for the whole family. Embark on a seafaring adventure and thought-provoking cautionary tale about the importance of passing on beauty to the younger generation, where relationships once lost are found again, when tested to choose what they stand for and who they will stand with.
Beauty will save the world! I have felt it! I've lived it!
Laughter, action, and tears, reminding us about the sacred things that make life worth living. To listen to full episodes or exclusive behind-the-scenes content, go to beautywill-save-the-world.ca.
I want to more than just survive. I want to hope and feel alive. I want to live, truly live.
beautywill-save-the-world.ca.
And now, back to the discussion.
I feel like if we're going to talk about beauty, we have to talk about social aesthetic standards of beauty. Because if you talk about beauty and ugliness, it's a problematic language, right? Because for a long time, people with physical disabilities were considered not beautiful, right? I mean, the most cliched shorthand to designate a villain in an old genre film is give him a scar. You know, so well, there's nothing.
Literally, the Lion King. His name is Scar.
Yeah, his name is Scar. So, you know, people are held up to these standards of, you know, beauty must be symmetrical and must have a certain. I mean, it's a standard most of us can't meet.
It's aesthetic.
Yeah, and that's problematic, right? Because so I think I always get worried about aesthetic beauty at all. And, you know, I have a friend who's a cognitive scientist, and he'll say, well, no, this is wired in the brain. The brain wants to see symmetry, wants the eyes to be exact. You know what I'm saying? And so in some ways it's sort of hardwired. But that doesn't, as a scholar of culture, that doesn't sit very nicely with me.
That's the argument people make with classical music. That same argument that it's so precise and mathematical.
Exactly.
That it would elevate
so there's
anyone.
beauty. You could study, and you could teach an AI, you know, to replicate, because it's just a formula for beauty, a physical formula and an auditory formula.
I like that formula for beauty.
But that's tricky. Yeah, that sits wrong with us, doesn't it? We don't want that.
It does.
And you guys did the Hunchback, I think, of Notre Dame. I mean, there's a Quasimodo's an interesting figure there. Oh, yeah. Right? Is he a beautiful big figure? Is he a sublime figure, regardless of what he looks like aesthetically?
Well, and that show forced us to analyze, of course, what's beautiful in society, sort of like the systems that are in place or not in place or whatever. And like there's an ugliness to certain things. Like I think everyone can agree segregation is ugly. You know, like certain things there's just, you know, there's an ugliness to capitalism when it's in excess. There's an ugliness to politics. Let's just face it. There's so much like ugliness of things, of division, and it's hard to describe it as beautiful. And of course, we've all like met people that when we say, oh, they're such a beautiful person, we mean on the inside. Like you don't typically hear people, oh my God, you gotta meet Adam and Marita. They're just so beautiful. They're stunning.
Their eyes are so symmetrical.
Yeah, like you mean beautiful people in the sense that they're people that have a beauty to them, you know, right? Yeah. So it's interesting.
Well, I think you alluded to this, but the attachment of beauty to a moral thing. And ugliness to something that is immoral or negative. And I think that's another really important piece that, again, gets so twisted in our society and how we talk about beauty, about sex, about who is valuable, about who is attractive, about who is worthy of love and desire and all these things. And I think about young people growing up in that environment. And I think we need to tell a different story about what beauty is. I did a Google search just as I was thinking about this to see if my theory was correct, because I suspected it was. And I encourage you to do this. Type in beauty to Google and see what comes up.
Oh, yeah? We're going to do it. We're doing it.
Okay, we're going to do it live. I'm not going to tell you what you're going to find.
Here it is.
All right.
Well, first we're going to get AI, which is infuriating. Yep. So.
I get beauty will save the world comes up. That's just,
I get the Wikipedia entry on beauty.
Beauty. I got businesses.
Click on the images tab.
I got images.
Okay. Yeah.
So when I just typed in beauty,
I see a lot of makeup
on the
regimens.
all,
There
it's a beauty salon, beauty salon, beauty salon.
It's all
beauty salon, beauty
skincare
salon.
products and
who are
yeah.
the people, like, what do the pictures look like? Who are the people that
They're
you're looking
all
at?
very young women.
They're all young women, and what color's their skin?
Yeah, mostly. Well, actually, I have a pretty mixed,
pretty mixed
group.
color.
Yeah.
It's a diverse. I mean, it's
But
flawless skin.
yeah,
of all shades.
Yeah. Yeah, but definitely all young women.
I don't see any scars. Let's put it
No.
that way.
100% all women.
And I found they actually looked like, even though there was different skin tones, they were all sort of relatively on the lighter end, and
it's true.
They looked very similar.
I wonder if you got the same results as me. That's what because I've got a really diverse group of photos.
I do have a darker skin.
You know,
So there was,
that's
but
interesting.
it's all sort of in a sort of light chocolate mocha,
Oh, I
to
see
the
what you're
right?
saying.
Like
Yeah.
there's still a particular standard,
Mm-hmm.
and yes, we've sort of broadened with diversity and so on, but that really there's a sort of formulation to it, and I found even though they're different colors,
I had
their
to scroll
faces,
down.
okay, so you found one that's quite a bit darker, but there's a formulation to how the faces look, right, and so.
And it's all makeup centered.
Yeah, it's all makeup.
That's what strikes me. Is it's all beauty tips.
So I didn't.
It's all
see
selling
any
me makeup.
Landscapes,
No,
mountains, oceans, water.
Yeah.
No childbirth.
Art.
No
Yeah,
art.
definitely no
Not
childbirth.
even any art.
No image of childbirth came up. No. Yeah, but what's weird is no art came up. That's super weird. Yeah. Well, I guess I'm not surprised because, again, when we use the word beauty, that's a lot of people, that's what we're sort of thinking about.
Where's James Joyce? I don't understand.
Yeah, where's your
Joyce
700-page novel on there? You know, but
so that's why this conversation is important.
Yeah,
right?
No, that's a great point. Yeah. Is there an expression like beauty is only skin deep or something? Or
Sure.
Am I literally just making that up?
Absolutely.
I feel like there's some expression like that or something.
Yeah, for sure. That's an expression.
Yeah. Yeah. Like, so, yeah, going back to this conversation about, would anyone describe sex as beautiful? You don't hear people describing it that way. I mean, I've heard it said that way, I think, in religious circles when they're trying to pitch it to you that wait until you're married and sex in your marriage is a beautiful thing. But it's interesting that, anyhow, it's just interesting, like you were saying, Marita, like we don't have the language of pleasure. And I know in some of the work you do, you are helping people to find that language and find that pleasure in sex. It's unfortunately, sex has that thing, that vibe that people don't want to talk about it, especially in faith and religious circles. It's very much an afterthought, or it's like reproductive purpose only. It's changing. I think that conversation is changing, but certainly for centuries, I'm sure it was sort of oppressed and not talked about much, and it was just something you do. And then, of course, with young arranged marriages or child marriages in the past and all these things, like, you know, again, it goes back to what you were saying, Marita, about the lack of choice, and it's just kind of happening to you and you're not really participatory in it. It's a consumption thing. Sex is often just viewed in a consumption way, right? I mean, the pornography, transactional. Yeah, definitely all sorts of stuff. But there can be beauty in that. I mean, it exists for a reason, but, you know, it is great to be mature, because then you more know what you want and what you're looking for, and more capable, perhaps mentally and psychologically, to handle what comes with it and stuff. But, you know, I don't know. Do you have any more thoughts on that before we move on from that? Sex, pleasure, beauty.
I mean, there's lots of places I can go. One thing I will suggest as reading for folks is the essay "Uses of the Erotic" by Audre Lorde, which is just a fantastic essay. And I was introduced to this by Adrienne Maree Brown, who is a contemporary. Audre Lorde died in, I think, the 90s. But Adrienne Maree Brown wrote a book called Pleasure Activism. And she goes through the essay in that book, and she has some critiques of it and sort of some other things that she talks about because it's very much gendered. She's talking about the feminine. And so Adrienne Ray Brown sort of brings in some ideas around broadening the perspective of gender. But I thought this quote was really interesting and related to the story. She's talking about the erotic. So she defines it in the essay and you can read it, but she talks about how it's been separated and we sort of think of it as something that's about sex, but it's really about far more. It's about our life force, our creative energy, a much bigger idea.
And the Greeks have 4 words for love, one of them being
and
eros.
one of them is eros. Yeah. So she talks about that.
Yeah.
So she says, it provides the power which comes from sharing deeply any pursuit with another person. The sharing of joy, whether physical, emotional, psychic, or intellectual, forms a bridge between the sharers, which can be the basis for understanding much of what is not shared between them and lessens the threat of their difference.
Oh,
wow. In that case, the feast is erotic.
Yeah.
Right, by that definition.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Which is so weird to say. But
It's very weird to say, but it's true.
Butchered the meaning of the word erotic, I think.
Right,
Yeah,
but in that sense, it is. It's about sharing the joy of something together.
Right. And Babette is French, right?
Yeah.
And I don't think it's an accident that Karen Blixen, Isak Dinesen, the author, chose a French person for this character because the French, at the time there was a particular sort of ethos around what was happening in Paris at the time, right? And I think it's such a juxtaposition against this, very ascetic community in Norway where there's a little fishing village and even the food they eat is really simple.
Yes.
My ancestors actually come
bread
from
and
Norway.
Ale soup. Bread and ale soup and cod.
Yeah, boiled fish with salt.
Okay, but do you know what that fish is? Do you know what it's called?
Cod? What's it?
So it's some kind of white fish.
Yeah.
So in the movie, I could see the fish that they chose and the texture of it. So my ancestors are from Norway, and we have a tradition, not in my family because it's horrendously stinky stuff.
You talking about lutefisk?
Lutefisk.
Yeah, I come from the American Midwest.
So you know what
I've
lutefisk is.
Yeah.
And what does it smell like?
Oh, it's kind of sulfurous. It's it's nasty.
Gross.
It's not appealing.
Oh my.
So what they do is they take this whitefish and they soak it in lye because I think at the time they didn't have a lot of, this is very, very old. They didn't have salt deposits in that part of the world. And so they would have to preserve the fish. So they preserved it in lye and then so it'd be like a week of soaking in water and then a couple days in lye and then you dry it. And then you reconstitute it by soaking it again in water. So at this point, it's just this gelatinous mass. And, some Norwegians, they think it's, Christmas time, you have lutefisk, it's a tradition.
Really? Interesting.
But coming outside of that tradition, when you're not used to it, it would not be appealing to someone who came from France and had, all of the beautiful turtle soup and everything else that she was having.
Interesting.
So, I just thought that was a really cool detail in the story where you have this person coming so full of life and so full of ideas and that erotic force that she wants to share so much with the community. And keep in mind, she spent 14 years making ale soup and lutefisk and whatever else she was making.
Never complaining, presumably, or judging them. Or
Wow.
And then she decides she wants to share that. So to tie that back to sex.
Good luck. No, I'm sure you have a plan to tie it back.
No. Let's go to lutefisk. I think it's that building of language requires coming across difference too, right? And like we have so much difference in our world right now, so much polarization. And particularly around sex. Like you talk to 5 people and you're going to get 5 different understandings
and gender.
Different sex and gender. Like, I mean, as someone who talks about this in my work, I can tell you it's not something that everybody is really excited to talk about all the time. And so I think that developing that language and being willing to be uncomfortable is required. Like I'm sure, Adam, with your students, there's, like we were saying, with some of those stories, they're really uncomfortable.
Oh yeah.
And they're really difficult. And I don't think that there's any sort of really valuable art or really incredible experience. Like she put in so much work and effort into that meal. And in order to have that experience of the sublime experience, the transcendent experience, it's not something you can just pick out of a bag or flip through on your phone and have that experience.
Yeah. Can I ask you, going back to something you said a while ago, when you were talking about the clouds, the colors of clouds, and you said children have no problem with this, the language of pleasure. And yet, as you've suggested, we don't know how to talk about it at all. We being not children and young adults. So how and why and when do we lose that? If your sense is that it sort of comes naturally to be able to speak your pleasure, and I mean, newborn babies are just sort of inchoate messes of pleasure and experience, and so I just wonder, what do you think is the way we're taught in school? Is it something about the structure of the nuclear family as it's been passed down? Like, where do we lose this, and why do we lose this ability to articulate what our pleasure is in ways that aren't just cliches?
Probably goes with losing our sense of play and wonder. It's all a part of the same package, maybe. What do you think, Marita? Yeah.
I think that's it. I think you've hit the nail on the head, because I think there's lots of things we can talk about capitalism and the way that, education is really focused on teaching us how to be part of society. And there are good things about that. But, the society that we have isn't really working for everybody, and neither is the education system. And it's really not necessarily centering that individual core needs of each person. It's sort of saying, well, this is what everybody's going to need to do, so you got to get in line with it. But I think that sense of wonder is something that is so deeply valuable and so powerful and important. And I know for me, growing up in a family where everybody was older than me, I was the youngest, I wasn't exposed to a lot of things like media. We weren't allowed to have movies and different things that were secular. And so my world was small in that way. And so when I was exposed to people who had a bigger world, I didn't want to appear as someone who didn't know.
Right.
And so I think for me, I suppressed a lot of that wonder and sort of getting to experience something for the first time, because it makes you vulnerable, actually, to say, oh, I didn't know about that. Oh, wow, this is an amazing experience. This turtle soup is amazing. If everybody around you has been eating turtle soup all their life and they're like, but it's not that exciting. Like, it's just turtle soup.
I can tell you firsthand, and you know me. I mean, I do find wonder still, a full-grown adult. I'm still impressed by everything all the time. I'm always surprised to hear someone's stories or their opinions on things. I'm always like, I'm very like, that about me. But so like, you're right, it is vulnerable, because I've definitely, I've been interacted with, that sounds so weird. I've been interacted with, but basically I've had interactions where someone mistakes that for stupid or naive or ignorant.
That's right.
And it's not. It's like, in other words, again, like, someone asking questions is good. It shows a sign of wonder, curiosity, and what you don't know, obviously. Yeah. And then people who never ask any questions, like, you don't know what you're missing. Well, but it is vulnerable. It is vulnerable. I've been sort of like treated as if I'm naive or stupid when it's the opposite is true.
And doesn't this fear come up? Not to get too intimate, I suppose, but like, isn't this why so many teens and 20-somethings have such bad sex?
I think.
I mean, I'm certainly willing to say that my teens and 20s, most of my sex, which I thought was perfectly fine, was pretty bad. Now, from the perspective of being 52 years old, I can say it was bad. And you know why it was bad is because I wasn't willing to admit that I didn't know how to ask for what I wanted, or to ask what the other person wanted, or to admit that I didn't know what I was doing. You know what I mean? It's all this like, I'm pretending based on what I think this is. Exactly.
That's most adults, I would argue. I mean, like the ability for people to be able to share with their partner what they actually enjoy.
I mean, if that's rare. Not happening, then the kind of communion you're talking about, which is real eroticism, which in some ways has nothing to do with sex, because it can be articulated in all kinds of ways.
Right.
How can you have communion with someone if you're not opening yourself up to the admission that you don't know everything, and you might.
And that's why I think, like, you asked the question, like, how do we change and shift how we talk to young people? I think we have to bring the conversation outside of sex, because it's so it's like one of the most deeply vulnerable experiences that we can share with another person. And so if we haven't learned that language before we metaphorically and literally take our clothes off, it's so difficult to access. And so learning that language and being willing to be, like you say, being naive, being in wonder, in that sense of like, wow, this is a new thing for me. I've never experienced this. I don't know how this is going to go. Let's see what happens. The possibilities open up. Yeah. Rather than me saying, oh, yeah, I know all about that. And then trying to pretend like I know what they're talking about.
Yeah,
I really don't.
That's right.
It's so many people are pretenders now.
Pretending in bed or pretending at an art museum that you know what the painting is. So it's sort of the same category.
It's painful when people pretend to know when they don't, and you can tell they know you know, and they know that you know, and we're
fake
all
it till you make
it. Yeah,
well, and I think it's about 50% of women fake orgasms.
I bet.
So why do we fake it? Why do we do that if we're not actually having a good time? Why are we pretending that we do?
Right.
And there's that question, there's lots of answers to that question of why, but I think it is deeply connected to that question of like actually being able to ask for what you want and creating that space. I think that has to start outside the bedroom because you can't have those deeply difficult conversations. Right.
Yeah. And like going full circle, kind of back to her at the beginning of the conversation, when it comes like, the eating chips, the junk food late at night thing, it's so interesting that like sex can be that it like some sex or almost, a lot of sex perhaps can be the junk food thing. Maybe it's goal oriented, like you're working towards it ending, or whatever. And I think that's missing out on so much as well that that's my opinion, there's junk food sex, isn't there? And then there's like Babette's feast, where there's this idea that erotic it's this beautiful, shit, like me dancing for joy. I feel like, yes, like erotic is a good way to describe it in the sense that, it's sublime bliss. Bliss is what I felt. I remember.
Well, I think I'm not I've never been big on dancing in clubs, but I know a lot of my friends who are big on club dancing. Yeah. I mean, they will express it in that way. Yeah. That is this sort of erotic communion with people. And
yeah, definitely a shared experience.
Yeah.
For sure. I do want to ask one final question kind of on this topic. We didn't quite cover it as much. We didn't quite cover it. So I do want to ask it. Can the experience of pleasure or beauty lead to healing, or transformation or growth? And if so, how? and do you know anyone who's experienced that? Beauty, or pleasure leading to growth or healing, maybe healing, like physical healing, mental health healing. Maybe perhaps healing from a wound, like where like I know for me, like I something profound happened to me when I was young, and I remember being in this moment of redemption, like an experience of like the events of that hard time in my life were completely redeemed by something down the road, and I remember being like keenly aware of the moment, and it was like a interesting healing transformational thing because it allowed me to like forgive and put things to bed because in a sense I got the last word in that sort of redemptive outcome, which not everyone gets. I understand that, but the redemptive outcome also had an irony to it that like just I don't know, it was sublime. I'm not gonna lie, it was like a sublime feeling of like just I don't know, like redemption's the word I can think of where that negative experience was utterly redeemed in a way that now I'm glad I had the negative experience because I feel like a beauty is found there, like beauty in brokenness, beauty in pain. Again, like beauty, trigger warning, might alter you, might require something of you. So if you don't want to pursue beauty, if you don't want to change or grow or be transformed, well, then definitely avoid beauty and only pursue distraction and the bag of chips type pleasure, which of course I love chips. Who doesn't? But yeah, that sort of thing. But yeah, what are your thoughts on the healing, transformative, or power of pleasure or beauty or both? What do you guys think?
Well, I mean, to me, it was when I was younger, it was theater That was my pleasurable experience that transformed me. I was a bullied, lonely, friendless kid until I discovered acting at age 14. And you know how it is in plays. I mean, you form these really deep, intense, short-lived sometimes communities, and the pleasure of being in the trenches and putting that play up. And, you know, I mean, to me, it was just because it wasn't just about the theater and the acting. It was about the communion that I'd been missing and starved for so long as a kid in the suburbs without any friends, you know, and suddenly I had this. So it's like the experience, it was the pleasure of, you know, getting the applause on stage and people saying, "Oh, Adam, you're so good at this." And, you know, the praise and all that. But that was all trivial. What really was that sense of having found community and communion and a chance to express things. I mean, that I put that in the pleasure camp.
Because there's something sacred going on there. It's more than theater, just like Babette's feast is more than the food.
Yeah,
you know?
That's right. Yeah. That's right. And you know, the biggest critique of Brave New World, which is a book that I taught, is because they said, well, why we've genetically engineered society to be pleasurable. Who doesn't want that? But it's a lot of the students made the observation in my class. They're like, well, what is pleasure without pain? What is beauty without ugliness? You know, like this, they're not being allowed to choose beauty or seek or strive for beauty. It's just handed to them in kind of a bottle,
which isn't beauty, which isn't beautiful.
That's right. Yeah.
It's not coming from the soul.
That's right.
It's not in
that's
the soul.
right.
And as Marita pointed out, that's so that they can be controlled.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
So there's an economics to it as
carrot
well,
or stick.
You know?
And so like many argue, you know, Aldous Huxley, it's carrot. And George Orwell's stick.
Yeah, that's right.
You know, 1984, they're controlled not through pleasure.
That's right.
They're controlled through scarcity and fear,
true.
I believe. Yeah,
that's true.
Yeah. What are your thoughts about that healing power of pleasure in your work or in general, Marita?
Yeah, I mean, there's so much to say. I think
Go ahead. Yeah. Say it all.
Take it in a different direction than, because you went to community and that experience of community, which is 100%. It's so real. And that's certainly been true for me in my life. And I could talk about those experiences. But the one that I thought of was really, for me, for healing, was really around that integration piece. So going back to that, how I define the capital P pleasure is that experience of integrated body and soul and spirit, an experience that is fully ensouled of happiness, enjoyment, physical sensation, all of those things, but that's integrated. And for me, growing up in an environment where God was described to me in a particular way, that often involved control, that was, you know, God is unconditionally loving, but suddenly there's all these conditions that appear.
Right.
And so for me, I had to actually, that all was taken away of various things that happened in my life that were very painful, and everything that I believed was suddenly just ripped out from under me. And for a long time, I healed and you know, built community and did all the things and went to therapy and all the things that you need to do to heal. But it wasn't until I really had a deep experience of depression, of burnout, losing a friend, somebody that I knew well, to suicide, where I was really in a place where it felt like a desert. It felt like that emptiness, right? Yeah. And part of my healing process was to walk in the woods every day. Every day I went for a walk. Doesn't matter the weather, rainy, sunny, whatever. And through that process, I connected to several things. I connected to my body because I was moving my body physically. I moved through some really difficult things. So important,
the body, moving
and moving through, completing the trauma cycles, and then noticing. So Mary Oliver was a huge force in that during that time in my life. And she's great. One of my favorite poets. But she says, pay attention, be astonished, and tell about it. And so to me, that was the time I was learning to pay attention. And so I would notice like the way that the earth was softer at different times of the year with the rain and cracked and hard with the sun, and the way that the sunbeams come through the leaves, and the way that the patterns in the leaves are actually the same as the patterns in my hands, and the way that the birds and the little animals would change their behavior depending on the season. And like I just noticed. And so I felt connected to this little piece of forest that's near my house. and I felt connected to myself. And I had profound experiences of pleasure, the sun on my face in a time when I wasn't feeling a lot of pleasure. Pleasure. This was 2020 when the world was shut down and we were all isolated and we were all alone. And so kind of like in the feast, that the beauty becomes so much more profound in that time of what felt like a desert to me. So that for me was the way that I was able to reconnect with a new understanding of divine, of source, of something that was much bigger than me that I didn't understand, but it was an experience of love. I can't define what that is. I can't define beauty. I can't it's something that I experienced. And I think learning that language for myself is part of what fuels my desire to do the work that I do, to help to open those portals for other people, and to help ease that passage. I think pleasure can ease the passage through portals during times that are really, really difficult for transformation and growth. You know, you think of the partner massaging the woman who's the person who's going through childbirth. You think of people who do water births so that you're in an environment that feels good. You think of people who set up their birthing space in the way that they would. Like, there's a way to think about easing our way through the really difficult moments of life. It's not an escape from it. It's not
Excellent
saying,
point.
I got to get out of this moment. I got to leave my body because it's too painful to be here.
It's not avoided. Right? It's not denying.
You're
going through the pain.
I'm going to be here. I'm going to be in it.
Right. And you're finding in the pain journey, in the suffering, you're finding ways to ease the burden of it, but you're not avoiding it. Like, you're going through the pain so that that transformation can occur on the other side, rather than avoiding the pain. Of course, you'll be stagnant. There won't be growth. Yeah. Thanks for sharing that, Marita. Yeah. So in conclusion, then, the pleasure and beauty can be transformative and healing and bring about our butterflies out of our cocoons, right? Yeah, and no longer caterpillars. And I liked also what you said, Marita, and I relate it really well. Integration. I certainly feel, I'm so happy I'm me today, and I feel like much more fully integrated as a person, all aspects of my life. Then it's a journey to get there. And I strongly encourage everyone to not deny sort of aspects about yourself and find ways to fully integrate, ignore society's messaging around the kind of person you can be or need to be, especially if you're someone who's quite liminal and you're kind of like straddling different spaces and stuff. Like, embrace that idea of yourself. You don't need to conform to fit in, so you can be as unique as be yourself. And it's like, you're unique there, but I think uniqueness can be scary for many people too. But I, to me, it's one of the most beautiful things about human beings is their uniqueness. You're never going to meet the same person twice, like that's just, you're never going to, especially when you dig down to get to know them and their stories, right? And what they've been through and what they believe. When you can really get down to it, or like, over a coffee or something, not yelling at people over social media or the, the sort of divisive rhetoric we see about all aspects of society, but really getting to know someone, I think can be
coming to the table.
Yeah. Yeah. Being understood to me is one of the most beautiful capital B things ever, where if you feel understood. Now, whether that be you feel understood by God or fully embraced or accepted by God. So being understood, most people probably the closest they can get to it is their partner, and even that's not always going to be the case, right? Where they understand you, but there's something gorgeous and sublime about being understood.
There's an old Motown song, right? Oh Lord, please don't let me be misunderstood.
Oh,
right?
Is there? Oh, I don't know that one, but that
it's a prayer.
Until
you said that, I realized, that old Motown song's actually a profound prayer.
Connect with that.
Don't let me be misunderstood, Lord.
Yes, I so connect, because there's nothing more like painful than being flat out misunderstood. Like,
that's right, and there's so much misunderstanding in the discourse you're talking about.
So
the social media discourse,
so much, and it's so tragic, especially if you know the person, that their heart, their track record, what they believe and care, and you still misunderstand them. That you make no effort to understand where they're coming from. It's very painful. So But the opposite is true. When you have that friend or that lover or that God, that being understood, being accepted and fully embraced for who you are is awesome, you know? So, and it's sex at its best, right? That could be sex at its best, you know? Well, what did we talk about today? Politics, sex, religion. We talked about all the
things you're not
this is the
supposed to
podcast to be.
Yeah. Trigger warning. This podcast talks about the things no one wants to. Yeah. Anyhow, I ask everyone this who comes on the podcast is like the last thoughts that you have for the listeners on this topic of beauty and pleasure. Why don't you go first, Adam? Any last thoughts you have that you want to just like conclude with for our listeners?
I'm just going to be selfish about it and say, come to the table November 5th to the 16th to see Babette's Feast at the Gladstone, because in a way we are enacting these things on stage as our gift to the theater community of Ottawa.
Well said. And people there will be experiencing it, not consuming and watching it. There's an experiential aspect of theater that isn't just consumption. It's true. Okay. Well, thanks, Adam, for being on today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me again.
Yeah. And Marita, what about you? Any last words for the listeners?
Well, you've set me up beautifully with that sort of last summary. And of course, I will also be at the table for Babette's Feast. I'm not part of the play, but I will be there.
Awesome.
But I think what you were saying about, you kind of looped back to the polarization and the ways that we need to come to the table. And I wanted to end with a poem from Rumi, if that's okay. This is one I have to credit my brother with bringing me this one. And he's reminded me often as we go through some challenging things in the world. I think it's called, The Great Wagon is what it's called. Out beyond the ideas of wrongdoing and right doing, there is a field. I'll meet you there. When the soul lies down in that grass, the world is too full to talk about. Ideas, language, even the phrase each other doesn't make any sense. The breeze at dawn has secrets to tell you. Don't go back to sleep. You must ask for what you really want. Don't go back to sleep. People are going back and forth across the doorsill where the two worlds touch. The door is round and open. Don't go back to sleep.
Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you for this wonderful conversation. I was joined by MARITA SMITH. MARITA is a registered nurse and sexual health educator. And I was also joined by ADAM BARROWS, a professor of English literature at Carleton University and part of the ensemble cast for Babette's Feast, playing at the Gladstone Theatre in November 2025.
This has been Telling the Story, a podcast dedicated to exploring faith, spirituality, arts, and culture, hosted by Ninth Hour Theatre Company in Ottawa, Canada. Thank you for joining us for our podcast series discussing the themes and ideas expressed in the story of Babette's Feast. You can listen again to this and all our podcasts through YouTube, Spotify, and directly on our website, ninthhour.ca. Be sure to follow us on social media and sign up for our newsletter to be the first to receive exciting announcements, opportunities, and behind-the-scenes content. We hope you'll join us again on Telling the Story.